300 people watched as Igor placed his hand on the secretary's belly. Vera stood by a column with a glass of champagne, counting the seconds. On the fourth second, her husband turned to the room and declared what she had been preparing for over a month. "This is the mother of my future son, and my ex can find her own place." The hall exhaled. Someone dropped a fork. Someone coughed. Vera felt 300 pairs of eyes drilling into her back, and in every gaze, she read the same thing: pity. A sticky, humiliating pity for a woman who had just been unceremoniously ejected from a life in front of witnesses. 15 years of marriage, 3 miscarriages, years of treatments, injections, and tears into a pillow. And it all happened at a corporate event, under crystal chandeliers, between appetizers and dessert. But Vera didn't cry. She smiled. Igor expected tears. He always got them from her. After every lost pregnancy, after every one of his cold reassurances like, "We'll manage," after every closed office door. He knew her as a broken woman clinging to a marriage because there was nothing else to hold on to. He didn't know that, for the past month, she had barely slept. Vera retrieved a small black remote from her purse and pointed it at the screen behind her husband. The projector flickered, hummed, and an image appeared on the white screen. Initially blurry, then sharp, like a slap in the face. Igor's office. Night. Larissa, that very Larissa with the belly, kneels before an open safe. Her hands rapidly sift through folders. The phone in her right hand lights up. Once, twice, a third time. She photographs documents one after another with the meticulousness of someone doing this for the first time. A silence fell over the room. Not the polite silence when a toast is awaited. A dead silence, when 300 people simultaneously stop breathing. The recording continued. Larissa closed the safe, stood up, and left the office. The camera in the corridor captured her handing her phone to a man in an expensive suit. He nodded, slipped the phone into his inner pocket, and disappeared around a corner. Vera wasn't watching the screen. She was watching her husband's face. Igor turned pale, not red with anger, not contorted with annoyance, but genuinely pale, like a man who understood he had just lost everything. He lunged for the projector, pushing guests aside, knocking over glasses, but 2 security guards intercepted him near the stage. "Turn it off!" he roared, grabbing the guard's sleeves, trying to reach the screen. "Turn it off immediately!" The recording continued to play. Vera had found a skilled specialist, a former security employee whom Igor had fired 3 years prior for disloyalty. He had installed the cameras in such a way that even a professional wouldn't have found them. A month of recordings, 12 episodes, irrefutable evidence. Vera had prepared this blow for 31 days. She wanted to prove to everyone and to herself that Larissa wasn't a homewrecker, but a thief, a predator who used a weak man for access to his money and secrets. She wanted Igor to see his precious mistress rummaging through his safe and understand whom he had chosen over his wife. This was supposed to be her triumph. And then Larissa fell to her knees, not dramatically, not theatrically. Her legs simply gave out, and she collapsed onto the parquet, clutching her stomach. A sound like the howl of a wounded animal escaped her throat. "It's not true," she screamed through sobs, tears streaming down her face, smudging her mascara into dark trails. "He made me." He said, "Either I do what he says or he'll talk about the baby." Vera froze, the remote in her hand. Something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. Igor stopped struggling. He stood between the 2 guards, looking at Larissa with an expression Vera hadn't seen in 15 years. It was fear. True, primal fear. The fear of a man who understood that not just a plan, but everything was about to collapse. "Shut up," he said quietly, almost a whisper, but in the dead silence of the hall, everyone heard him. "Shut up, immediately." But Larissa didn't shut up. She lifted her head, looking at Igor with a hatred that had clearly been building for a very long time, and blurted out what turned everything upside down. "The child isn't his. The child is Konstantin's, his deputy. Igor knew and blackmailed both of us." The hall buzzed. 300 people started talking at once, in whispers, in hushed tones, in full voices. Some filmed with their phones, some backed away towards the exit. Others, conversely, pushed closer to catch every word. Vera stood motionless. The remote in her hand suddenly felt unbearably heavy. She looked at the sobbing Larissa, at her husband's pale face, at the buzzing crowd, and understood that her month-long plan for revenge had just crumbled to dust. She hadn't hunted the right prey. Larissa wasn't a predator. Larissa was just as much a hostage of Igor's as Vera herself. All these months while Vera was gathering evidence, while she was planning a public exposure, while she imagined her husband being humiliated and crushed, all that time she had been striking at a person who was already trapped. A man emerged from the crowd. Vera recognized him. Konstantin Dmitrievich, Igor's deputy, a quiet, unassuming man who had sat in his boss's shadow for 15 years. He approached Larissa, helped her up, stood beside her, and looked at Vera. "I have everything to put him away." Kostya's voice was steady, devoid of emotion, as if he were reading a quarterly report. "But I need your signature on a statement. You're the only one who saw him falsify tax reports." Vera knew what he was talking about. 3 years ago, late one evening, she had entered her husband's office without knocking. Igor was sitting at his desk, 2 stacks of documents before him, originals and copies. He was meticulously, neatly rewriting numbers, like a schoolboy doing homework. Seeing his wife, he wasn't embarrassed. He simply said, "Close the door from the outside." And she closed it, and remained silent for 3 years because she was afraid. Now the choice was simple: sign and become a witness, risking Igor's revenge and his connections, or leave, take her divorce settlement, and move on, pretending she knew nothing. 300 people were looking at her now, not with pity, but with anticipation. Kostya handed her a pen, an ordinary ballpoint pen with the company logo. Vera took it, felt the cool plastic under her fingers, and then Igor was suddenly beside her. The guards were momentarily distracted, and he slipped between them like a snake. His face was inches from Vera's. His breath smelled of cognac and fear. "Will you sign?" he hissed. "I'll tell everyone why you actually had 3 miscarriages." Vera's hand froze over the paper. The pen slipped from her fingers and rolled across the parquet. Vera looked into her husband's eyes and saw something new there. Not anger, not despair, but the cold triumph of a man who knew his trump card beat any other. 3 miscarriages. She had always thought it was her fault. Weak health, stress, age. The doctor shrugged, prescribed vitamins, recommended rest. Igor held her hand in the hospital each time, said the right words, and then went to his office and closed the door. Now she understood why he closed that door. Vera turned and walked towards the exit. She didn't run. Her legs wouldn't obey. 300 people parted before her, and she heard their whispers, but couldn't make out the words. A roar filled her ears, as if she had submerged her head under water. In the lobby, Kostya caught up with her. He grabbed her elbow, turned her towards him, and she saw his face was gray, gaunt. "I know what he's hinting at," he said. "I have the medical documents. He was giving you medication." Vera looked at him, not understanding the words. "Medication? What medication? What is he talking about?" Kostya took out his phone, opened his gallery, and handed it to her. On the screen was a photo of a prescription, her name, her date of birth, a drug whose name she couldn't read, the letters blurred before her eyes, the signature of a doctor she had never seen. Scroll further. She scrolled through prescription after prescription, pharmacy receipts signed by Igor, excerpts from the pharmacy chain's database, 3 years of regular purchases, like clockwork, drugs that cause uterine contractions, drugs incompatible with pregnancy, drugs she had been taking unknowingly, disguised as vitamins that her husband thoughtfully brought her every morning. The taxi stopped at the entrance. Vera didn't remember calling for a car, getting into it, or giving an address. Kostya sat beside her, silent. Outside the window, streetlights flashed by, and each light counted down the seconds of her former life. A life where she had been the wife of a good man with a difficult temper. The apartment door was ajar. Vera froze on the threshold. The light was on inside, though she distinctly remembered turning it off before leaving. Kostya nudged her aside and entered first. The safe in the study was forced open. The door dangled on a single hinge. It was empty inside. No passports, no apartment documents, no folder with their joint savings. On the desk lay a sheet of paper, weighed down by a crystal paperweight. Vera's gift for their 10th wedding anniversary. You chose sides. Now live with it. Igor's handwriting, neat and precise, as always. He even wrote his threatening note beautifully. The phone rang at 12:30 at night. An unknown number, a male voice, polite and official. Vera Andreevna, this is your husband's lawyer. I must inform you that Igor Pavlovich has filed for divorce. The grounds are your marital infidelity. The application is accompanied by photographs confirming your relationship with Konstantin Dmitrievich Volkov. According to the prenuptial agreement, the party who breaches fidelity forfeits the right to asset division. Vera turned off the phone and placed it on the table. Kostya sat in the armchair opposite her, looking at her. The photos are fake. He prepared them in advance, probably when he found out about me and Larissa. Vera nodded. She should have felt something. Fear, anger, despair. But inside there was only emptiness, as if someone had removed all her organs and left only a shell. At 3 a.m, there was a knock at the door. Larissa stood on the threshold without a coat, in a thin dress with a bruise on her left cheekbone. She was trembling so violently her teeth chattered. He found me, she whispered. He said, if I testify, my child will be born an orphan. Kostya jumped up, helped her up, and led her to the sofa. Vera brought a blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The 3 of them sat in the ransacked apartment as dawn began to break outside. I have nothing left, Vera said aloud, and the words sounded strange, as if she were talking about someone else. No money, no documents, no reputation, and you two are too scared to testify. Kostya opened his mouth to object, but Larissa squeezed his hand and he fell silent. They both knew Vera was right. Igor knew how to frighten. Igor knew how to destroy. And now he was cornered, and a cornered animal was the most dangerous. The doorbell rang again. Vera glanced at the clock. At 8 a.m, she approached the door, looked through the peephole, and froze. Galina Petrovna, Igor's mother, stood on the doorstep. A small, frail woman of 72, whom Vera had seen at most once a year at family dinners. In her hands she held a worn suitcase, and her face bore the expression of a person who had made a decision and would not back down. Vera opened the door. Galina Petrovna entered, placed the suitcase in the hallway and looked at her daughter-in-law, then at Larissa with the bruise, then at Kostya with his ashen face. I was silent about his father for 30 years, she said. Enough. Please like this video so that YouTube understands you're interested in such video stories and recommends more quality narratives. Galina Petrovna unfastened the suitcase and pulled out a yellowed cardboard folder tied with twine. The knot was old, tightened so long ago that the string had dug into the cardboard, leaving deep grooves. The old woman untied it slowly, carefully, as if something fragile lay inside. Everything here is about the Larionov family. My husband was just like him. Igor is his exact copy. Vera watched as her mother-in-law laid out documents on the table, photographs, letters, medical records with faded stamps, 40 years of history compressed into a stack of paper 2 fingers thick. Pavel's first wife was named Nina. Galina Petrovna pronounced the name as if tasting it after years of silence. They married in 72. 3 years later, she disappeared. Everyone thought she'd gone to relatives in Riga. Pavel said so. I thought so too when I married him in 78. Larisa moved closer, examining a photograph of a young woman with a short haircut and tired eyes. Kostya stood by the window, watching the street, a habit acquired in the last 24 hours. Nina didn't go. Galina Petrovna placed a medical record with a psychiatric hospital stamp on the table. Pavel falsified documents about her mental disorder. He had a doctor friend. For money, he wrote whatever was needed. Nina was taken for involuntary treatment. She died there 6 years later. Vera took the record in her hands. Notes in the margins, made in a different handwriting, small and hasty. Patient is adequate. No signs of illness detected. Detained by order of the chief physician. And an illegible signature of someone who knew the truth but was afraid to utter it aloud. Where did you get this? I found it after Pavel's death. He kept it in his safe like a trophy. Nina's letters were there too. She wrote to him from the hospital, begging him to let her out. He didn't reply, just put them in the folder. Galina Petrovna took out a stack of envelopes, tied with the same twine. The paper had yellowed, the ink had faded, but the words could still be deciphered. Pasha, I don't understand why. Pasha, it's cold here. Send warm clothes. Pasha, I can't take it anymore. At the bottom of the folder was a photograph, a funeral, a winter day, a group of people by a fresh grave. In the center, a man in his 50s with a hard face. Beside him, a 12-year-old boy in a black coat. Igor knew. Galina Petrovna continued. Pavel took him to the funeral. He said, "This is Aunt Nina, Mother's sister." Igor didn't ask questions. He never asked questions about his father. He just watched and learned. Kostya moved away from the window and sat next to Larisa. His hand rested on her belly. A habitual gesture, a reflex developed over the last few months. "I have something else," he said. He took out his phone. Semyon Arkadyevich, the company's former accountant. Igor sent him to a nursing home 5 years ago after the old man refused to falsify reports. I found him yesterday. He's agreed to testify. In exchange for what? A transfer to a normal clinic. Where he is now, they barely feed him. Igor pays for the cheapest service package, enough to keep the old man alive, but not enough for him to live humanely. Vera closed her eyes. Another person Igor had broken and discarded. How many had there been over the years? How many people had remained silent out of fear? How many had he destroyed as meticulously as he had destroyed her unborn children? Larisa's phone vibrated. She looked at the screen and turned pale. It's a link from an anonymous number. Kostya took her phone, opened the link. A video appeared on the screen. A psychiatrist's office, soft light, a leather chair. A woman sat in the chair. Vera recognized herself, her hairstyle, her clothes, her voice. "I'm thinking about killing my husband," the woman on the video said calmly, almost mundanely. "Every day I imagine how I'll do it. A knife, poison, an accident. I have many options, but it's not me." Vera watched the screen, feeling her fingers go numb. "I never said that. I've never been to a psychiatrist." "Deep fake," Kostya said, zooming in on the image, scrutinizing the details. "Well made, but still a deep fake. Look at the shadows. They're falling incorrectly, and the voice is slightly slowed on the consonants. It doesn't matter." Galina Petrovna took the phone and placed it on the table, screen down. "What matters is that this video has already been sent to the judge, the prosecutor, the police. Tomorrow morning they'll come for Vera." They came 3 hours later. Vera didn't resist when they put her in the car. She didn't argue when the doctor at the reception desk asked questions. She didn't cry when the orderly locked the ward door. She just stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks in the plaster. The ward was small: a cot, a nightstand, a window with bars. Outside the door, people in white coats walked by, keys jingled, someone shouted in the far end of the corridor. Vera lay motionless, thinking of Nina, who had spent 6 years in a similar place, of letters that no one had read, of a grave attended by a 12-year-old boy in a black coat. By evening, an orderly peeked into the ward, a young man with a tired face. He placed a glass of water on the nightstand and leaned towards Vera. "The examination was ordered by Judge Markov, your husband's classmate," he said quickly, almost whispering. "They want to keep you here for a long time, like that woman 40 years ago." "How do you know about the woman?" "My grandmother worked here as a nurse. She told me." The orderly straightened up and walked towards the door. "I can't help you. But tomorrow at 9 o'clock, the guard shift changes. 4 minutes. No one is on duty at the back entrance." He left. The door closed. Vera was alone again. She didn't sleep that night. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the hospital. Footsteps, voices, distant crying. Sometime after midnight, a phone rang in the corridor. A male voice answered, and Vera recognized the intonation of the chief physician. "Yes, Igor Pavlovich, everything is ready. We'll make the diagnosis tomorrow. Paranoid disorder, tendency towards violence." With such papers, she wouldn't get out of here for years. Vera closed her eyes. 40 years ago, Nina lay in a similar ward and heard similar words. 40 years ago, no one came to her aid. The ward door opened. Larissa stood on the threshold, a white coat, a nurse's badge on her chest, hair pulled back under a cap. Her hands trembled, but her voice was firm. "We have 4 minutes until the guard shift change. If you enjoy this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos." The metal steps of the fire escape burned Vera's bare feet. Vera ran down, clinging to the railing, her hospital gown fluttering in the wind. Larissa pulled her by the hand, breathing heavily. Her belly made it difficult to move quickly. Down by the main entrance, blue lights were already flashing. Igor had reported the escape before they could even get out of the building. "This way!" Larissa turned into a narrow passage between the buildings. "There's a car." In the clinic's backyard stood an old gray Volga. Galina Petrovna was in the driver's seat. The small, frail figure was barely visible above the dashboard. She started the engine. Vera had barely slammed the door shut. "Both of you, duck down!" The car shot forward. Vera pressed herself into the seat, hearing shouts and slamming doors somewhere behind them. Galina Petrovna drove confidently, cutting through courtyards, winding through alleyways she knew by heart. "I've lived in this district for 40 years. I remember every underpass." They drove for almost an hour. The city outside the window changed. Central streets, residential areas, an industrial zone with abandoned factories. Finally, the car stopped at a peeling 5-story building on the outskirts. "The apartment is registered to my sister." Galina Petrovna turned off the engine. "My sister died in '92. I never re-registered the documents. No one will find it." The studio on the 3rd floor smelled of dust and old books. A saggy sofa, a table with chipped varnish, a window overlooking a wasteland. Vera sat on the sofa and only then realized she was trembling. Larissa brought an old robe from the closet and draped it over her shoulders. Then she sat down next to her, cradling her belly. They sat in silence, listening to Galina Petrovna rattling the kettle in the kitchen. Kostya arrived 2 hours later. He entered quickly, glancing around like a man accustomed to checking for surveillance. In his hands, he held a phone. "I have something," he said. He placed the phone on the table and started the recording. Igor's voice filled the room. Calm, businesslike, familiar. "Markov, I need a diagnosis. Paranoid disorder, tendency towards violence, so she doesn't get out of there for at least 5 years. A second voice, older and gruff, replied, "That will be expensive, Igor Pavlovich." "How much?" 200, and a place on the board of directors for my nephew." A pause. "Agreed." Where did you get this? Markov's son. Igor fired him a year ago. Publicly humiliated him at a meeting, called him a mediocrity, threw his things out of his office in front of everyone. The kid recorded his father's conversations just in case. Now the case has arrived. Vera looked out the window. It was getting dark outside the glass. The streetlights on the wasteland weren't lit. Somewhere out there, in the city, Igor sat in his office, thinking he had won, that his wife was locked up in a psychiatric hospital, the witnesses were intimidated, the judge was bought. He didn't know that his own mother was sitting in a rented apartment, helping to destroy him. "I need the original documents," Kostya said, sitting on a chair opposite Vera. "Recordings, prescriptions, financial reports, everything I've collected are copies. The court needs the originals." "And they are in Igor's safe, at the office." Larisa looked up. "I still have my secretary's pass." Igor couldn't intercept it in time. Too much had piled up. This was a trap. Galina Petrovna entered with a tray holding cups of tea. "He's anticipating someone will attempt to infiltrate the office. My son isn't foolish." "I understand." Larisa accepted a cup, but didn't drink. "Therefore, I won't be going alone." She retrieved her phone and dialed. Vera heard the ringing. Then a woman's voice answered, young and energetic. "Anna Sergeyevna, this is Larisa. Do you recall giving me your card at that corporate event? You said, if a story comes up, call me. I have a story." The journalist arrived an hour later. Anna Svetlova. Vera remembered her. 3 years prior, at a New Year's Eve party, one of Igor's partners had cornered a young woman. Vera had seen it, approached, and asked loudly, "Darling, won't you introduce me to your acquaintance?" The partner backed away, and the woman slipped free. They hadn't seen each other since, but Anna had remembered. "I need the originals." The journalist listened, making notes in her pad. Without them, these were mere words. With them, it was front-page material. The originals are in the safe. Larisa stood. "I can get in there, but if Igor catches me, we'll make sure he can't hide anything." Anna took a small camera from her bag. Livestream, 200,000 subscribers. If anything goes wrong, the whole world will see. They prepared until midnight. Larisa would wear the camera under her clothes. Kostya would monitor the recording from his phone. Anna would initiate the broadcast on signal. Vera would remain at the apartment. Her face was too recognizable after the deep fake. At 2 a.m, Larisa exited the building and got into a taxi. Vera watched her phone screen, observing the blur of night streets, the office building, the empty parking lot, the dark windows. Larisa entered through the service entrance and swiped her access card. A green light illuminated. The door opened. A corridor, an elevator, the 3rd floor, the reception area, the director's office. Larisa approached the safe and began to enter the code. Vera remembered this code, the date of their wedding. Igor had never changed it. Sentimental or overconfident, she'd never figured it out. The safe clicked open. Larisa started taking out folders, photographing them, and placing them in her bag. Recipes, reports, contracts with forged signatures. Everything Kostya had been searching for months. And then the office door swung open. Igor stood in the threshold. He wore a suit, as if he hadn't slept. Galina Petrovna had been right. He was waiting. She thought I wouldn't figure it out. He stepped toward Larisa. She retreated, clutching her bag to her chest. Vera watched on the screen as his hand reached for her throat. "Anna, start it." The broadcast began. 200,000 people watched as the CEO of a major corporation grabbed a pregnant woman by the throat, his fingers tightening. Larisa gasping as she tried to break free. Comments flooded in. Some were already calling the police, others recognized Igor, some were shouting in all caps. Igor didn't see the camera. He only saw Larisa, the woman who dared to betray him. "You destroyed everything," he hissed in her face. "Everything I built." The police burst in 7 minutes later. Vera watched as uniformed officers subdued her husband as he struggled, yelling at the camera, "My wife orchestrated this. She's crazy. Check her diagnosis." 200,000 people heard every word, and 200,000 people saw him just moments ago strangling a pregnant woman. The investigator arrived at the safe house before dawn. Young, serious, a folder under his arm. He looked at Vera for a long time. "We need to verify your psychiatric status. Until the diagnosis is officially cleared, you cannot be a witness." Vera nodded. She knew this wasn't the end. But for the first time in a long time, she felt something akin to hope. The courtroom smelled of wood and dust. Vera sat on the witness stand, her hands folded in her lap, gazing straight ahead. Opposite her, behind the defendant's barrier, sat Igor in handcuffs. 2 months in pre-trial detention had changed him. His face was gaunt, dark circles under his eyes. His expensive suit had been replaced by drab institutional clothing. The judge, a woman around 50 with a weary expression, opened a folder and began to read. "Report of the Independent Psychiatric Evaluation. Citizen Larionova, Vera Andreevna, has been examined by a commission of 3 specialists. No signs of mental disorder were found. The initial diagnosis made at Dr. Samashko's clinic has been deemed fabricated." Igor flinched as if struck. His lawyer, a young man with darting eyes, the third during the proceedings, whispered something in his ear. Igor waved him away. Vera felt something loosen within her. For 2 months she had lived with the stigma of being crazy. For 2 months her words meant nothing because the database listed her with a diagnosis. Now, there was no diagnosis. As the court moved to hear witnesses, the judge made a note on her papers. "Witness Krasnov, Semyon Arkadyevich." The old man rose from his seat in the front row. He walked to the witness stand slowly, leaning on a cane, but his back was straight. He had changed in 2 months. Kostya had kept his promise and transferred him to a good clinic. His cheeks were rosy, his gaze clearer. In the third row sat 2 young men, Semyon Arkadyevich's grandsons. He hadn't seen them for 5 years, ever since Igor had forbidden his family from visiting the old man. Now they had traveled from another city and sat side by side. "Please tell the court about your work at the defendant's company." The prosecutor stood from his seat. "I was the chief accountant for 12 years. The old man's voice trembled, but his words were clear. "In 2019, Igor Pavlovich demanded I falsify tax returns, underreporting profits by 40 million. I refused." "What happened after your refusal?" "I was fired." Semyon Arkadyevich glanced at Igor, who averted his eyes. "A week later, men came to my home and said that if I told anyone, my daughter would lose her job and my grandsons would be expelled from college. Then I was taken to a nursing home. They told me, 'This will be better for everyone.'" The old man fell silent. The courtroom was quiet. His grandsons looked at their grandfather, and the younger one, a young man of about 20, wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "For 5 years, I lived in a 2-by-3-meter room." Semyon Arkadyevich now spoke more softly, but the microphone amplified every word. "They fed me once a day. I saw a doctor once a month. Igor Pavlovich paid for the cheapest package, enough to keep me from dying, not enough to live." The courtroom door opened. 2 police officers escorted in a handcuffed man, gray-haired, portly, with a ruddy face. Judge Markov. Just yesterday he had presided in this very building, delivering verdicts, deciding fates. Now he was led past the defendant's bench, and he tried not to look at Igor. Igor looked at him, and in that gaze was hatred, pure, concentrated hatred of a man who understood that his former friend would drown him to save himself. The court admits the recording of a telephone conversation into evidence. The prosecutor activated the dictaphone. Voices filled the room. Igor and Markov were discussing the price of a diagnosis, $200,000, and a position on the board of directors. It was as if they were talking about buying a car, not a human life. Next witness, the forensic toxicologist. A woman in a white coat stepped up to the stand. She spoke dryly, professionally, but her words made the prosecutor gasp. Analysis of the substances seized from the defendant's safe revealed the presence of misoprostol and metrixate. Both substances are used for medical pregnancy termination. According to pharmacy records, the defendant regularly purchased these medications for 3 years. Systematic poisoning in small doses. 3 interrupted pregnancies for the victim. Direct consequence. Vera closed her eyes. 3 years. 3 children she would never see. 3 times Igor had held her hand at the hospital and said the right words, then retreated to his office to check if it had worked. Victim Larionova, the court requests your testimony. Vera stood, her legs held firm. She surprised herself. She walked to the podium, placed her hands on the wooden barrier, and looked Igor in the eyes. The first miscarriage occurred in 2017. I was 3 months pregnant. In the morning, I felt pain and called an ambulance. At the hospital, they said my body couldn't cope. Igor arrived 2 hours later and said, "We'll manage." Then he went into his office and closed the door. She remembered every detail, the smell of hospital sheets, the cold light of the lamps, her husband's hand, warm, steady, on hers. She had thought then that she was lucky to have such a husband, that he supported her. The second miscarriage in 2018, 4 months pregnant. The same pain, the same hospital, the same words, "We'll manage." And again the closed office door. Igor stared at the floor. His lawyer scribbled in his notebook. The room was silent. The third, in 2019. I didn't cry anymore. I just lay there staring at the ceiling. I wondered what was wrong with me. Why couldn't my body carry a child? The doctors found no reasons. The tests were normal. I thought it was my fault. Vera paused. Someone in the room sobbed. She didn't look to see who. Now I know that he went into his office to check if it had worked, if the dose was sufficient, if he needed to add more. Igor raised his head. Their eyes met. Vera expected to feel hatred, pain, a desire for revenge, but inside there was only emptiness and a strange relief that she no longer had to pretend. Defendant, you are granted your final statement. Igor stood. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then turned to the room and spoke rapidly, disjointedly, like someone who understood he was no longer being heard. It's a conspiracy. My wife, my mother, my deputy. They conspired against me. I built the company for 20 years. I gave people work and they... The court withdrew to deliberate the verdict. They waited for 40 minutes. Vera sat motionless, gazing out the window. Rain fell outside, the first of the summer. Drops streamed down the glass, leaving crooked trails. Galina Petrovna sat beside her. The old woman took Vera's hand and squeezed it, silently, firmly. They sat there until the judge returned to the room. The verdict. Judge opened the folder. Larionov, Igor Pavlovich, is found guilty under Articles 111, intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm, 159, fraud on a particularly large scale, 327, document forgery, 163, blackmail. He is sentenced to 12 years of imprisonment to be served in a strict regime penal colony. Igor jumped up. I'll appeal. You'll all regret this. This is illegal. The escort led him from the room. His shouts echoed in the corridor for a long time, growing fainter. Galina Petrovna stood and walked toward the door. Vera watched her pause at the exit, where the guards held Igor awaiting a vehicle. I feared your father my entire life. The old woman's voice was quiet, but in the empty corridor everyone heard it. And then you. Today I am free. Igor turned away, but Vera saw his face twitch, saw something break within him. Not from the sentence, not from the handcuffs, but from those words, from the fact that his own mother looked at him without fear. 3 months later, Vera stood by the window of a new apartment, a small one. One room, a kitchen, a balcony overlooking a park of her own. On the table lay an invitation to Christina's baptism. Larissa had given birth to a daughter 2 weeks ago, naming her Galena after the woman who had helped them all. Outside, leaves turned yellow. Children played on the playground. Dogs ran along the paths. Old women sat on benches. Ordinary life. A life that continued. Vera smiled. Not for the cameras, not for the viewers, not for the husband who had monitored her every move for 15 years. Simply because, for the first time in 15 years, she wanted to smile. I recommend listening to these 2 stories you see on the screen. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. And in the comments to this video, you'll find a link to a compilation of the best stories from across the internet. Thank you for watching.